The party is united, Sophie, and about just to make sure that the misbegotten view is corrected. There are no groups in the party. There is one leadership, one party and one goal. But there may be individuals who may feel that they are not aligned to the collective vision of the party. Now, an individual can't just declare themselves to be in leadership. It's not a kingship or a queenship where you need to declare yourself. There are processes, there are organs, there are constitutional procedures and rituals to be completed, and that is what we have done. In terms of violence, the MDC is a part of excellence, opposed to violence. In terms of our democratic discourse, we value dialogue, we value peace, we also value tolerance, as much as we also value the issue of constructive debate on issues before we arrive at positions. So the issue of leadership is a settled question. Anybody who feels that is still a question, they are probably the question themselves. But there is no question of leadership. It's a done deal. We are focusing on the election. We are united to win this election. We are even building a grand coalition to make sure that beyond just the party, we are able to attract other like-minded forces to build a convergence around the idea of transformation, the idea of prosperity, the idea of an opportunity for the people of Zimbabwe. That's what we're working on.
Let's talk about the elections. Is your machinery well-oiled?
Well-oiled and well-fueled. It's not sufficient to be well-oiled, you just need the fuel. And everything is all systems go. We are on all fours. All our ducks are in a row in terms of our candidates, all the candidates in the parliamentary elections. We are a very strong party, by the way, the majority party and the dominant party in this country, bar the distorted outcomes in the elections. But we are the only game in town in terms of electability within the country. But more importantly, we've also made sure that our policies, our new Zimbabwe blueprint, which is already finalized and ready to be rolled out, is going to be a cracker on the market, because we are bringing new ideas, new policies, and we are saying that it's not possible for yesterday's men to resolve today's challenges. We are saying it's not possible for the 20th century man to pretend to be answers to 21st century questions. So ED and his crew, they are part of Anglo-Bob battalion. They must be allowed to rest, not for them to be in the mainstream of politics. Politics is not a place for retirees to try their luck like ED.
You can't do away with senior politicians with wealth of knowledge.
Indeed, they are part of the past, but certainly not part of the future. So the nexus and chemistry between the past and the future is very important. That is the transition. ED has been that transition.
How do you convince the elderly people in the countryside? Because they still believe that senior leaders are the only people who can take the country forward.
Thank you, Sophie. We've been in the countryside. They actually believe that age ain't nothing but a number. They actually believe that young people's time is now. The liberation struggle of Zimbabwe was waged by young people. Liberation struggles elsewhere, including the fight against apartheid, was waged by young people. So the role of young people in transformation is certainly not contestable, and that is the view in the rural areas in the countryside. People love the idea of young people taking charge, young people being the game changers, young people define the course of their future, and that's what we are here for. And that's why we celebrated when Anglo-Bob was waving goodbye at us. But we did not say goodbye to Anglo-Bob to say welcome to another Anglo-Bob in the name of ED. And this is why we feel that ED must also accompany Anglo-Bob, as they have been together for the past 38 years.
How are you going to approach the land question?
Ours is a very radical view. We even want to rationalize the land reform and move just from land redistribution to agrarian reform, which is a deeper and more comprehensive program. And in this we are talking about transformation, not just change of ownership, but also issues of transformation in terms of land holding, so that we have title in the land, so that we also are able to extract real value from the land. So it's a deeper reform program. We need to compensate those who were, victims of the process, and we have a program in place to make sure that there is fair value compensation, but also making sure that land is extracted in value, both exchange value and use value. Right now, there's only the use value of land without the exchange value. We need to make sure that we securitize the issue of land, but more importantly, empower the people who are on the land in terms of tilling the land and utilizing it for the common good.
Willing buyer, willing seller, and now South Africa is reviewing the whole land question.
It will work here because we've already completed the land reform program. So there are issues that have been raised by the former farmers. We need to be fair to them, but we also need to rationalize and have a land audit. There are many people who own many farms, which is against the ethos, values, and ethics of the liberation struggle. One man, one farm. One woman, one farm, so that there is equitable distribution of that resource. So the issue of rationalizing is very important to make sure that there is no undue corruption in terms of land. Land is a very important resource because that's where the whole definition of a country is. So we need to be able to deal with these issues. But more importantly, the compensation of the former white farmers is an issue that has always come in the context of proper rights, in the context of the rule of law, in the context of good governance. So we need to do it as an obligation, as a necessity.
One man, one farm, one woman, one farm. Do you give land back to the state or you give land to individuals? Let's talk about title deed. Who owns the title deed?
Let the title be to an individual. Now, we can agree on the tenure system. Our tenure system has been to say, let's have a leasehold, a 99-year lease that is given to individuals, but they should be able to then borrow against that piece of land so that at least people have title. We also have freehold in certain circumstances, so it's going to be multifaceted depending on the circumstance. There's also state land that will continue to be part of the state in terms of the constitution. So that will be variegated on account of circumstances and also a necessity in terms of land.
Can you briefly take us through your economic policy? How do you hope to do things differently?
We have the new Zimbabwe blueprint, which is our SMART document. SMART meaning the sustainable and measurable agenda for real transformation. That's SMART. It's an acronym for our new Zimbabwe blueprint. Now, that SMART document speaks to a number of issues. It speaks to issues of governance, how we are going to make sure that governance is resolved from a structural point of view, but also from the infrastructure and the culture. We need to make sure that we give people their responsibility to govern. Let the people govern. In this case, we've had leaders ruling instead of leading, leaders governing instead of the people governing. So we need a change of culture. The police have been known as a police force. We must move into a police service so that the police are not seen as enemies of the people, as a threat to the people, or people are not seen as a threat to government. There's been a cat and mouse relationship between government and the people. That must be reviewed, that must be changed, and that is in the context of the governance culture. But also, devolution is our next revolution. We need to make sure that power and authority is devolved to lower structures, to all the regions in the country. There's been marginalization of other regions, particularly in Matabeleland, in Manekaland, and also in Masingo. Certain southern regions have been marginalized. So the national question has to be resolved so that there's a shared national vision. We do not have a national vision. ED is saying Zimbabwe is open for business, but when it is closed for good governance, when it is shut for accountable governance. Just yesterday I told the hospitals, I said you can't have an open for business mantra when hospitals are shut for health, for life. Because the biggest business at the end of the day is life. So that's the first element on governance. The second one is the economy. And on the economy, we are saying it's a very simple issue. Let us remove the noise and inconsistency in the leadership, in the cockpit. We have too many inconsistent statements coming from the same government. Too many statements, multi-speaking, double-speaking by government, threatening bilateral agreements, BIPAs, with South Africa, with Botswana. That has been the culture of this government. So we need to deal with the policy consistency, but at least in terms of predictability of policies, so that we have a long-term view on the economy, dealing with productivity. We have not been producing. We have been a consuming nation. We need to go back into production in agriculture, in manufacturing, in dealing with resuscitation of tourism, and all the other key sectors like mining. We have 60 minerals in the country: natural gas, tantalite, lithium, in abundance. But our economy is underground. We need to exhume that economy through making sure that we deal with productivity, we deal with a proper jobs plan, which is going to be anchored on public works programs, but also revitalization of the service industry. As you know, according to the McKinsey report, by 2020, the consumer-facing industries are going to be the key thing on the African continent. Look at the malls in South Africa. That's how economies are going to be, boosted, and that's what we would want to then deal with in terms of the jobs plan. The third issue on the economy is also the important issue of dealing with corruption. Not just a lip service, dealing with corruption, but having a root and branch reform of corruption, putting in place criminal, punitive criminal measures at law that will punish, criminal elements within, because it has been a big issue. Of course, with it, to deal with the economy, the technology transfer and the skills transfer, just on the economy. Number 3 is the issue of the social services. That is a very important area, because for a long time, our people have been marginalized, our people have been left vulnerable, particularly the women, particularly the youth, and minority groups. They need inclusion. We need a shared society. We need a shared economy. And that can only be possible through our programs in terms of our education policy, free primary education from grade 1 to grade 7, but also be able to then allow parents to prepare for the secondary education. Tertiary education will reintroduce the loan and grant system, but then beyond that, we must be able to then, coupled with the jobs plan, create an exportation of our very important labor, because Zimbabweans are educated, 96% literacy rate. We need to make sure that we build a dividend out of it by exporting that kind of labor for the benefit of the nation, but also for individuals in terms of what Cuba used to do to the African continent, but also to the greater, worldwide.
How are you going to address the challenge of the currency?
Well, the currency is a very simple issue. We are going to have a basket of currencies. We'll immediately ban the bond note, because the bond note is a fiction. It's just something that Mr. Mugabe introduced out of fiction and fallacy, to say we are now using tissue paper as money. This now is equivalent to a US dollar. This one is equivalent to a rand. We need to remove that kind of fiction, because it's not real. And once we remove and scrap the bond, we then need to make sure that we securitize those who had their balances in the banks, because they have been robbed of their real currency. We then make sure that on the back of our own gold reserves that we are going to build, we are able to create a basket of currencies, the rand, the US dollar, and many others, for a period until we resolve issues of productivity, confidence, consistency. Because in Zimbabwe, the bank queues we are seeing are not on account of the cash crisis. It's actually a confidence crisis, it's a trust crisis, but manifesting itself as a cash crisis. So once you deal with confidence issues, trust issues, leadership issues, everything else will then fall into place.
Do you subscribe to the notion of the indigenization policy?
Indeed, we believe in localization, but not the indigenization in the ZANU-PF concept. Because indigenization in the ZANU-PF concept is actually looting, which is institutionalized. They believe that indigenization is about the chefs, those who are in the rank and file of the leadership of the party, in a partocratic culture where there's no distinction between the party and the state. Those who are in the party think that there's the state, those who are in the state think that they are the party. That must be stopped, and we don't believe in that kind of indigenization. Ours is to say, let's assess the value chain, let's localize benefits to local communities, so that we build community integrated infrastructure support programs where we have local minerals. That's why I talked about devolution. Let's cascade and trickle down the benefits of the economy to the local community, so that it's a shared economy, so that it's an inclusive economy. So we are not going to have the 51% indigenization policy. That will scrap, but we are going to make sure that those who invest their monies here, they are able to also, in terms of the value chain, benefit downstream and upstream, the Zimbabweans. So it's a localization as opposed to indigenization in the context of Zambia. So we are like day and night. We are different seasons when it comes to our perspectives on that policy.
Ramaphosa coming to Zim?
Well, President Ramaphosa is obviously a very important development on the continent, within the region. Is an astute leader with a polished history. We believe in him. He has handled complex issues, not just within South Africa before, in the context of the negotiations and the dialogue, working with President Mandela and other leaders in the ANC. He has also been very useful, you know, in the context of the region, in resolving some of the issues, leading some very important missions. So we have a lot of confidence in President Ramaphosa in terms of resolving issues. You know, South Africa is going to be very key as a guarantor to underwrite the democratic transition in Zimbabwe. You know that we have our complex problems with the military, complex problems with the coup, not a coup, complex problems with election violence, complex problems with, in the past, rigging of elections. So all those are issues to be resolved. And we count on a strong brother, an effective brother. And I think in President Ramaphosa, we have a great brother. Brother Cyril is the friend of the people of Zimbabwe.
Your views about President Mugabe, he has retired, but he seems to be very aggrieved.
It's a curse for a country and a nation, for such elderly men in our country, our founding father, to be so angry. So we must be able to go and deal with that anger. I hope ED will be mature enough to try and engage him and hear what his views are, because also he has his issues, and I think as a former president and also as a liberation icon, we must be able to address some of his issues. So I feel for him because there are certain things where he feels betrayed, and betrayal is not good in leadership. But again, you know, he has done his bit. He must also allow us to try and correct where mistakes were made.
He didn't want to leave office, and now he's saying young people must take over.
Well, like I told you, wisdom comes at different levels. You know, age, at times, people say age comes with wisdom. At times it comes alone. But when it comes alone, it can also be visited by wisdom at a later stage. And I'm sure in President Mugabe, we now have age and wisdom